Okay, all right. Wait a minute. Wait. Let's talk about spinning roller coasters.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? All right, today's video, as you probably got by the intro, I want to talk about spinning roller coasters. Now, these come in every shape, size, and variety out there, so I want to basically touch on about 4-ish manufacturers worth of them and just go over some of the basic principles. A lot of people have that question, it basically boils down to not so much what's exactly different about them, but why do they work the way they do? So how do we get that best spin out of them? Because I know a lot of us that ride spinning roller coasters, myself included, kind of disappointed when I get off one that didn't have a good spin. So is it the manufacturer that had a problem? Is it the ride maintenance crew had a problem? What's going on? So I thought we'd talk about that today. This is your first time here, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share, forward it to other people. Tell everybody about it. It helps me out. I do appreciate it. All right, spinning roller coasters. Where do we start? Well, there's a couple different types out there, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to stay in what I consider free spinning roller coasters. Now, by that, I mean there are some rides out there that we're not going to touch in this particular video, so I'll get those out of the way now. The infamous Intamin Zack Spin, the S&S, what are they called? The 4D spins, the vertical ones, and the Intamin, their controlled spin, the same with the Vekoma, like Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. I'm not going to get into those because those aren't free spinning. Well, the S&S, okay. But basically, I'm not going to cover those models here. I'm just going to talk about some of the more traditional style. Now, way back when, these have been out there for a while. Maurer's been designing these things forever. Intamin's built some of these. Gerstlauer has built a lot, and MACK Rides has built a handful of these things. So let's kind of talk about this. Where do we start? Well, the ride's construction in general, they're built just like a Mad Mouse ride. So they're built in such a way where the track is very tight, it's very windy. A lot of these rides actually have a Mad Mouse style circuit up on top, which is where they zigzag back and forth with each other. So these rides are very common to have sudden drops, sudden little peaks, hills, valleys, and very tight and flat turns. The other thing that these rides have that are kind of outside of the normal for things is almost like trick track. This is pieces of track where you'll be going straight and it will just suddenly bend to one side and then bend back to the other side for no apparent reason. There is a reason for that. It's part of the design element. So the coaches typically seat 4 people. Most all these rides that I'm talking about today, they seat 4 people. And there's 2 different styles of coaches, really. One's an internal seating and one's external seating. Now, industry-wide term? No, it's not an industry-wide term. In fact, I just made that up for the purpose of this video. But when we talk about seating, there are 2 different types out there. So the one that I'm most familiar with, actually, because I worked on it for a while, was a Gerstlauer style train. This is external seating. Basically, what I say when I mean external is the people sit away from each other, but they also face each other. So it would kind of be like your feet touch in the center. You're looking at the people across from you. All right, that's what I call external. Now, internal is like Maurer and like MACK Rides. These seats you're actually sitting back to back with people. So my back would back up against somebody else on the back side, and you sit back to back, you face away from each other. Kind of a unique opportunity there, but you don't have to stare at people, which kind of for some people that's comforting. It's I don't want to stare at the person across from me. I completely understand that, but that changes the design of the ride drastically. So what are some of the characteristics that are different here? Well, on your outboard, such as your Gerstlauer, such as the Intamin, which is Intamin built, looks like a tornado. They built the tornado, which is pretty infamous in and of itself. So when you build those external rides, so you sit further away from people, you're further out up against the coach, which means your coach takes up more space. If you remember my video on ride envelopes, that means the ride envelope for that particular coach is going to be much wider. It's going to be much bigger. The vehicle needs more space to pass through because it's got to spin around. This is actually a problem when it comes to catwalks around the side. So when you have to evacuate a spinning coaster, you have to get the coach back to correct, facing straight forward before you can evacuate it, because when they're sideways, they take up way too much space. So you've got to fix that. But the internal style coaches, like Maurer and MACK rides built, where you sit back to back with the other people, they take up a much smaller ride envelope. So you can actually weave them through tighter spaces and make tighter elements out there on the ride, especially when it comes to near-miss objects and things like that. Most all these rides use things like traditional lift hills, traditional chain lifts, Mad Mouse styles. That's where the chain lifts up a little bit out of the chain trough down at the bottom, and the coach is used to suppress it back in. The only real difference is this on the MACK Extreme Spinner, which is the best one for that to look at, is Time Traveler. I know there's been multiples out there. There's plenty of them out there. Curse of the Werewolf, if I'm getting the name right, at Epic Universe is also an extreme spinner. But those type of rides actually use LSM launches and stuff. So they don't have the chain coming up out of the bottom. So the coach is a little bit bigger. It's a little bit boxier underneath to make room for those magnets underneath there instead of the chain lift and stuff like that. You typically have a front axle, a rear axle. Depending on the ride manufacturer, they could be one solid, one live axle. By solid, I mean it's fixed. It doesn't really go anywhere. It could turn left and right. That's it. The live axle can not only turn left and right, it can also go left and right. It goes in every axis. That's what I consider a live axle. The construction's extremely similar between all these vehicles. And then we're going to get into some of the differences here along with it. So if I didn't answer it just now, don't worry. I'm going to go into more stuff here. But these videos are kind of hard for me because normally focus on one ride, one manufacturer, but I feel like you could throw a blanket over all these, so I kind of wanted to touch on everything while I was doing it. So I'm going to try to organize my thoughts and keep them going, but you know how that is for me sometimes. It doesn't work the best.
Hey, talk, squirrel!
Bear with me. Okay, so when it comes to the spin itself, the vehicle spinning on its axis, the way these things are put together is they are put together on top of a giant spindle. What's a big stud that sticks out of the middle of the coach. And they simply have large roller bearings around the outside. You put that down just like you were assembling a wheel. It's a large roller bearing on the bottom. The coach goes on top of it. Another large bearing on top and a couple of jam nuts on top of that holds it together. The coach spins around that spindle, no problem. Okay. The exception to this is the MACK ride. The MACK rides actually use a large slewing ring underneath there. It's an external geared slewing ring. Both the MACK spinner and the MACK Extreme spinner use a geared slewing ring in place of the large pin in the center. Now there is still a safety in there in case the slewing ring comes apart. The safety will hold the two pieces of the coach together, but they don't just rely on a singular pin with rotating bearings. They rely on the slewing ring to do motion and then transmit motor motion during the homing process. Now, on the Intamin, the tornado, the infamous tornado ride, on the Intamin one and on the Gerstlauer, the spindle is simply sitting there, the bearings are on top of it, the coach is allowed to go as fast as it wants to with as little drag as possible. Now, this is also the same for the Maurer rides and the MACK rides, but they have a little bit more drag on them, the MACK rides in particular. So MACK built an earlier style spinning coaster that looks just like one of the Maurers. The difference is, instead of using a device at the end of the ride to home it, they used a motor. So the motor is actually pushed up against the bottom of the thing, and that motor actually causes drag on the entire assembly. But this isn't such a bad deal because they also figured out early on that they wanted their vehicles to have a certain amount of drag as it spins. So the MACK rides aren't necessarily free spinning, but everything else is. Now, the extreme spinner, they fixed that problem on there to make it a free spin, true free spin. We'll get into that a little bit later too. So when you're talking about these large bearings, you can get in there and mechanically clamp the bearings down hard and then add heavier grease to them. That will affect how fast the vehicle can spin. But most of the time, shops, maintenance, everyone tends to keep the pressure on those bearings nice and light, so you can easily, like a lot of times on our Gerstlauer spinner, I could just grab the coach and rotate it around with one finger because the thing was very free spinning. It was very easy to move around. Now, does that help or hurt out on the track? Well, it varies partially by the style, whether you're sitting back to back or sitting away from each other looking at you. But the style varies just a little bit on there, but the outcome is different. So what I mean by that is that the spinning rides are all about inertia. That's it. An object in motion stays in motion. So the ride functions on that. So what happens is that you're sitting in the seats. If you have 4 people that weigh exactly the same in all 4 seats, the ride will almost never spin. For this video, I'm going to put a white circle right here in the center. This will represent the center of mass, which is the reason why a balanced load won't spin, because the center of mass hasn't changed between all 4 objects. Because it goes in, it makes a U-turn, it makes a corner, and it has no reason to spin because the load on top is completely balanced. It's not until you do something like take those 4 people that are the exact same size and remove a person from one seat. Now the weight is lopsided. Now there's more weight on the backside. Now what happens is as that coach turns and goes to turn around, that weight is heavier to one side, so inertia will try to pull that heavier side around in the direction it was going. And that starts the spin process. So what you're actually dealing with on a lot of spin rides is just the uneven balance inside the coach. The center of mass being offset from the rotational pin is also the reason why when the coaches lean far to one side or the other, like in that trick track example I was talking about, that's the reason that the coach will start to rotate, because the center of mass is being pulled towards gravity in those trick track examples. So you can affect that even further by moving your weight away from or closer to the center of the coach where it pivots. So for example, if we took that scenario 4 people evenly and took one person out, you now create this off-balance weight that as it goes around, the outside, that inertia will fling around the weight to the furthest side when you change directions. Now, when it comes to the coaches like the Maurers, where people sit back to back with each other, that's a lot less pronounced. It takes a lot more offset of weight to actually get the thing to rotate. I actually don't like the Maurer spinners because they typically don't spin that much. On the Gerstlauer, I've hit spins on them that's just like insane. It's pretty much the inertia has flung you back so hard up against your seat that the centrifugal force, you can't break free from it. And like, I remember one time I hit what was called the perfect spin. I called it the perfect spin, but that is where I'm talking about that offset of weight was in the direction of travel. And like as you go into the corner, if you're making like, let's say a hard left-hand turn like that, that weight should not be on the outside, because as you go around that left-hand turn, the inertia that just wants to keep that weight to the outside of the corner, it actually slows down and stops your vehicle, the spinning. So you can counteract that spin just as fast depending on how it hits out on the track. So actually what you want is if you go into that corner and it's going to go around the corner like that, you actually want the weight on the opposite side, but just slightly, not all the way off to the side, just a little bit off. And then when that goes to turn, it will cross the path and come out. The problem with that is that if you're in a very long sustained turn, that inertia, that way that flings out to the side and tries to rotate the vehicle, will almost counteract itself and just stop, because centrifugal force is flinging the weight, the heaviest weight, to the outside, and it stays there. I know it's a lot about weight on these things, but that's what they are. If you want to get a good spin on something, you have to kind of look at the course, look at how it turns, look at how it moves, and figure out where the weight has to be set best inside that vehicle. And then if you have a party of 4 and all 4 of you are different sizes, you can kind of watch the vehicle and figure out, okay, say first thing it does, it makes that hard right-hand turn off the lift. So because of that, we actually want to be on, and then it depends on what the next element. Oh, we want to be on you want the heavy people on the back side of it to the right-hand side, and then once it goes down, that will cross over, go up to make the left-hand turn and cross back up. Like, there's a lot of thinking you can do about this, a lot of trial and error about this stuff. And then there's smaller variances, which is like temperature and how fast the vehicle runs and everything else, which will make it that spin combination. All right, so on the Gerstlauer, they just let the thing rip and just said, go for it, spin as much as you want to. It's going to be fun. Great. On the Maurers, they put all the center of gravity close to the center of everything else, so it couldn't spin that much. So you get a much tamer, you still get to spin, but not as much as like a Gerstlauer or the Intamin, not as much as those rides. So it's like, okay, keep that separate, and we're going to keep this over here. You could spin, it's just not going to be a lot. Now, MACK, when it came to their rides, MACK, whatever you want to do, when it came to their rides, they said, well, we understand that we want it to spin freely, but we don't want it to go crazy runaway. So what MACK actually did was they actually installed a magnetic brake at the front of their extreme spinner to actually slow the spin down. Now, people say like, oh, so if we took that off, it would go really fast. It's like, no, it actually has the opposite effect if you take it all the way off as well. Because part of the spinning effect you get on the ride is when the vehicle changes direction. Just think about it. You go through the turn and you make a hard right-hand turn. When you do that, well, if you're balanced, it's not going to go anywhere. You're just going to stay the exact same way you're sitting. If I'm facing this way, the vehicle's running this way, and then I go to that hard right-hand turn and the vehicle goes like this, I'm going to stay just like this because there was no reason for this to change. So I'm going along and the vehicle turns and I'm just facing this way now as it goes. So MACK actually did something kind of interesting. They said, well, we're going to, on the large disc that sits underneath those, which is a giant, basically it's a braking disc. On that large disc, we're going to put a very small magnetic brake at the front of it mounted to the coach. So therefore, when the coach changes direction, it will actually pull the vehicle on top of it. It will pull your coach, the rotating part, around with it just a little bit, enough to help you start that spin. And then when the spin gets going pretty fast, that brake is also there to trim that back down and say, nope, don't go too fast. Slow down. You're not supposed to be going crazy up there. So it's a kind of the best of both worlds on that. Now, MACK's earliest spinner, what they did is they actually put, for homing, they put a motor gearbox underneath the thing, and that was connected. So the whole time it was running, it was open, it was free to rotate, but that does the same exact thing as the brake. It creates drag the entire time. So it can still turn, it can still rotate freely, but it can't go as free as, let's say, the Gerstlauer or the Intamin model could. So they're just they're drugged down a little bit underneath there. One interesting thing on the extreme spinner that MACK did is they put that large rotational disc underneath there that as it goes by the station or maybe even other parts of the ride, they simply put a magnetic brake off to the side, and then as the vehicle comes through it, it tries to slow the vehicle down. Well, it can't because the rotational brake is mounted to the rotational part of the vehicle. So what it tries to do is it tries to slow that down. If you look at it from the top, it tries to slow that down but can't, so it causes rotation as it passes through that brake. So I know Time Traveler, when it dispatches out of the station, the coaches start to rotate. That's because that disc on the outside is passing through one of those brakes, starting the rotation process. That is a problem with some of the other rides, like the Gerstlauers and things. When they're hot and they're running and they're really free and there's nothing to move them, a lot of the times you will just stay locked into your position, especially if the coach is balanced. You'll just stay locked into that position and you won't get the turning. You'll just basically just start shifting left and right along with the vehicle. So MACK's kind of fixed a lot of those things, and I like it. It's a really good thing. Curse of the Werewolf. I hope I'm saying that name right. Probably not. Oh well. Anyways, that's the same exact style ride out there. They put things along the track in order to help move those vehicles around and give it a little bit of extra spin. Now, the park, it's free range of what they set that little brake to on the front of the vehicle. If they want to tighten it way down and really control the spin, they can. They could tighten that thing all the way down on the inside of there, give it the most amount of braking feedback on the coach, and then it can't really do much. It could spin a little bit if your weight's really off-centered, but if your weight's more centered, you're probably not going to spin much at all on that thing. All right, so let's talk about the start of the spin process on some of the rides out there. Let's talk about the Gerstlauer and the Maurer. Both of those have a mechanical release. So what they are is that while the coaches are in the station, typically on all these rides, while the coaches are in the station, they are locked straight forward. They're supposed to be straightforward. The station is designed for them to be straightforward. It could be 180 degrees, but it's got to be straight. So they're locked into that position. And on the Maurer and the Gerstlauer, both of those have an unlock arm that sits off to the side. The Gerstlauer is a little wheel that hangs off to the side of it, and it's cantilevered with a big brake that pushes up against the inside of this. It's basically a large drum around the outside. That drum around the outside is what that brake holds on to. So as that little wheel kicks, which way was it? Was it up or down? Pretty sure it's up. As that wheel kicks up, it basically pulls that arm back away from the drum, and it unlocks the drum. As soon as that wheel goes up, it unlocks the drum, and then the whole vehicle on top is allowed to start rotating at that point. Now, you can put that little unlock mechanism at multiple spots throughout the ride. You don't have to put it at the top of the lift hill. A lot of Gerstlauers were placed at the top of the lift hill. A lot of the Maurers, however, they use a similar kind of device to unlock. Basically, on the Maurers, on the left-hand side, they've got a little wheel that's a twist to the left or twist to the right. So it goes one way or the other. I believe it's to the left is what unlocks it. So as the Maurers go up and over, that little wheel is pulled to the left, and it causes basically a clamp on a disc underneath the coach. A clamp on the disc underneath the coach to unlock, basically open up like that. And then that coach is allowed to freely rotate. Now, a lot of the Maurers I've seen, they'll actually go through the first drop and maybe into a different element before it actually hits that unlock. So you get a little bit, it's like the manufacturer's like, yeah, you could put the unlock in a lot of different places. It's not completely mobile, but they've given the park alternate options to mount the unlock command, essentially. So as a train goes up, it's like, okay, unlock, click, there it is. So that's unlocking Gerstlauer, unlocking a Maurer. Now, Tornado, the Intamin Tornado, that one is basically always unlocked. It sits there just in the state of unlocked. The actual station guides in the station area hold the vehicle and let it it has to go straight through there. So it's basically guiding the vehicle straight the entire time. It's one of the very few that does that. On the MACK spinners, those use a gearbox to right the vehicle back to the center and hold it straight there. So as it's in that area, the gearbox is locked essentially, and it can't rotate left or right. The extreme spinners do the same exact thing. They have a gearbox that holds it there. The difference is that on the MACK spinners, that gearbox is just unlocked once it leaves the station. So the gear is attached to the teeth underneath the coach, but the motor does not have a clamp on it. The motor is not being told to hold. So it's just out there spinning around doing whatever it wants to do. That's a MACK spinner. But the MACK Extreme Spin, like Time Traveler, like the Werewolf ride out at Universal, those guys have the same type of deal, but the gearbox and motor are actually pushed in and out of the gear assembly. So they fixed the problem with their first version spinner, where I said that motor gearbox is actually causing drag on the entire assembly, and it's doing the same thing, that little pinch brake. You say, well, if it's doing the same thing, why would you pull that away? Because the drag on that entire assembly does mess up the gearbox, and it kind of messes up the motor. It can create electronic feedback in the control system, all sorts of stuff. So Mac said, as part of this, what we want to do is we want to take that motor gearbox essentially away when it's out on the track. So they did. They made it positionable. So it moves into position when it needs to be, and then right as the train dispatches, it moves out of position away from there. You notice on those coaches, if you ever look at the front, I believe it's the front. No, it's actually the back. If you ever look at the back of those things, there's actually this thing with a red handle on it sitting down there. It kind of looks like a lever arm that you could pull on the back side of that coach. Well, that's a mechanical lever that pushes the motor to and from, basically away from that gear assembly. So if operations needs to go there and move the coach for some reason, with it locked in its locked position, they could pull that lever back basically and unlock the coach so it can free spin around. And then they push the lever back so it locks the coach back into position again, and the ride has control of it. That's how the coaches unlock for those manufacturers. They go out, they go around the track, people have fun, it's a great thing. Most of these things are still running off mechanical brakes because these rides are on the cheaper side. Some of them use eddy current brakes or magnetic brakes. And then the extreme spinners, those guys use linear synchronous motors to both accelerate and decelerate the ride on both ends. Now, coming back into the station is a problem. So you have a vehicle that's sitting on the track. It has roads, guides, up-stop wheels. It's going one direction. It doesn't know anything else. But on top of the vehicle, you now have this thing that is just sitting there chaotically spinning out of control. Well, you can't bring that into the station that way. That's not safe for the people on the vehicle. That's not safe for the people in the station outside of the vehicle. And then at the same time, you can't really control that. So you have to figure out a way to slow that down and stop it. Not only stop it, but in a lot of cases, fix it in one exact position and then move it forward. So a lot of manufacturers kind of develop the same thing. We'll start with Intamin at the end of their tornado ride. Basically, it comes through and there is a giant arm out to the side that's spring-loaded and pushes in towards the ride. As the coach is spinning, the vehicle, basically that arm pushes the side of those vehicles and it aligns it straight. And the whole time the vehicle just drags against that arm. As it goes around its corner, it hits another one of those arms to keep it straight. And then as it goes into the station, it's straight. Now, Intamin seems to be also one of the only ones that didn't lock their vehicle down. Like, while it's in the station guides are holding it straight, but there's nothing actually underneath holding that. It doesn't have a mechanical brake holding that vehicle. As far as I can tell, to my understanding, could be wrong about that, obviously, but that's what I gather. Now, from Intamin, we go to the Gerstlauer! For Gerstlauers, what they do is actually bring it into a position and home the vehicle into a straight position. So it actually pulls it into position, and then a wheel pushes up against that round drum that I was talking about earlier. The round drum that's underneath there, that's the one the brake sits up there and holds aside and says, okay, you can't turn yet. That round drum, a wheel pushes up against that and rotates the vehicle around until it finds its home position and stops it. Once it stops it in that straightforward home position, another arm, kind of like the Intamin, extends out along to the side and holds that straight while it advances the vehicle forward. Now, just outside on the Gerstlauers of that homing position, as soon as it advances the vehicle forward, it takes that unlock wheel on the side of the vehicle and pushes it down. I think it is. It pulls it down and is able to lock that drum back in there, is able to lock the brake back. So it brings it into position, the vehicle is still spinning, the wheel touches the side, slows it down, rotates it till it says it's straight, which it just does via a proximity sensor off to the side and a flag, watches that flag comes around, and as soon as it comes around, it stops it on the flag, and then extends the arm out as a safety to make sure it is in the correct spot, and then runs it forward. Then the cam locks the brake back into place, and it goes into the station the rest of the way. Now the Maurer spinners, they do a similar style thing to the Gerstlauers, but instead of that whole process where it stops and then rotates the vehicle to find it, they simply just use the arm kind of like the Intamin did, and they just go out and they just push the side of the vehicle until it basically hammers itself straight, and then it continues on forward. Once it goes forward from there, another arm, another cam locks that unlock wheel back the other direction, and it grabs the brake underneath there to hold the vehicle straight forward again. Now, the extreme spinner and the spinner, both by MACK, those guys come into a set of bus rails. Now, once the bus rail underneath the ride is the piece that carries power. They're typically colorful, and they look like they have a bunch of copper strips on the inside. Those fingers come along, the brushes come along and touch the bus rails, and it transmits power to the vehicle. Once the vehicle is powered up, then the vehicle knows that it's going to start spinning, and it's going to start spinning its vehicle around until it sees that flag. And then once it finds that flag, it's going to stop on top of the flag. So it rights itself around, and then it can go forward again. And it just holds itself there since it's powered by the bus rails. The motor is just keeping it in that location. You can even apply power to the motor brake to hold it there, so the motor actually doesn't need to turn at all. Simply the motor brake is applied. Power outage, the brake would release, and the vehicle could move again. But it's one of those things that probably is just said, okay, in a power failure, you want to just go up and hold that thing. The MACK spinner is probably the least familiar with of all of those. So if I have that wrong, and let people know in the comments how it actually sits up underneath there. Whether it's a singular applied brake or if I'm missing a different brake on that one. I get stuff wrong all the time, right? Human, just like everybody else. Now, the extreme spinner by MACK, that's a very similar process. It comes up, it gets powered by the bus rails, but once it's powered by the bus rails, it can now pull that gear or push the gear back into the teeth. Since it was retracted and allowed the thing to free spin out on the track, it now has to extend its motor back into where the teeth grab the side of the coach again, and then it can start its homing process. And then once it's done, it simply kills the power to its motor, the brake automatically applies, and the vehicle is able to go through and continues on. The bus rails that supply the motor voltage in those cases are also the ones that supply the unlock commands inside the station. Just like all four of them, really. Just the Intamin, the Gerstlauer, the MACK, both the MACKs, I should say. Those guys all use bus bars underneath in order to transmit the voltage needed to the restraints to allow them to lock and unlock, and then to see whether the restraints have closed enough to move forward into the ride. So there you go. I know this was a really chaotic video dealing with 4 different manufacturers of each thing. I think each one by itself would have been kind of a redundant and boring video to set out a series of 4 videos that basically all said the same thing. That's why I chose to compare them all in this one particular. Best design, honestly, I'm going to have to go with MACK for the extreme spinner. That looks really fun. I actually have not ridden on one of those. First one will probably be Time Traveler in Silver Dollar City, because that's the closest park to me that has one of those. Looks super awesome. Definitely want to go on that. I mean, if I could go find it and get on it out in the world there, because I know it's not around here. Definitely Tornado looks like one of those credits. Like that would be super fun to go on that ride, especially with the Tornado, what is it, insane mode or whatever it is. Basically, they start the coach spinning before it goes up and over. Yeah, that looks insane. Now, for the spin of it, just for the spin of it, I'm actually going to throw my name out there for Gerstlauer. Gerstlauer! The Gerstlauer spinner, I still feel, is the best one that you can get a completely chaotic spin out of. Very fast, like it'll blow your face right off if you're not careful. So I like the Gerstlauer ones for that reason. But it's definitely a hit or miss thing. Those things you could be sitting still the entire time, or you could just be spinning your butt off out there. So those are very, very hit or miss on the Gerstlauers. The ones that are always kind of like, pass each time is the Maurers. I honestly don't really care for the Maurers at all. They're just too bland for my flavor. Although those are all the ones closest to me, and those are the ones I've probably ridden the most of. But I honestly don't care for them that much. I'd rather go on a Gerstlauer, or if the chance presents itself, I'd rather go on an extreme spinner. All right, I think that's it for this video. Yeah, my head's kind of in all these different places, especially since this is my first video back after like a month of not filming. Been traveling and doing stuff like that, and before that I had to do a whole bunch of videos to prepare to get ready for traveling. So it's actually been like a month since I recorded a video. All right. If you have something you want to add, drop it in the comments down there. There's plenty of things people correct me on. That's no problem. This is a learning channel. We all get to learn stuff. So if you know something specifically and want to put it down in there, go ahead and drop it down in the comments. That is great. We will all learn from that. If you want to contact me, you could always email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com. Like, subscribe, share, give it to friends, do that sort of stuff. It does help me out. I do appreciate it. I'm actually on my way to 1 million subscribers, which is, what am I at now? I'm at like, no, never mind. Not 1 million. But anyways, my count's getting up there, so that's cool. I like that sort of stuff. So yeah. Stay off the air gates. Gerstlauer! Bye.